Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Hi, everyone. Thanks all for joining. We'll get started here in a minute. Feel free to use the chat if you'd like. We've got a question in there around everyone's favorite snack.
Spencer and I have both contributed our favorite snacks, but would love to see what other people's choices are for some inspiration. Also, I don't know where everyone is coming in from, but it is lunchtime where I'm at. So,
Yeah.
oh, Brendan put steak. Okay.
A steak.
Oh, seaweed snacks.
That's a serious snack. That takes some preparation. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm snacking too much now since the hybrid working. I'm just like constantly roaming around trying to nibble on something. Probably not great.
Yeah, my fears have been confirmed. In reading these responses, I'm just getting hungrier and hungrier. So maybe not the best strategy, but I do like the responses. Okay,
Ooh,
Hannah, sour gummy worms. Oof. So
yeah. Man, anything sour and sweet, I'm there.
fresh pineapple. Okay. I like fresh pineapple a lot too. I think if I eat too much of it, then my mouth starts to tingle. But it is a very good, very good snack to have for sure.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, we should get started here soon. Okay, you want to All right, let's jump in and get started. Thank you all so much for joining today. We're really excited to walk through some of this great content on delivering value to your customers today. My name is Spencer Davison. I'm the head of technical account management at Matik. At Matik, we automate data-driven content at scale. So that would be in the form of really any collateral touch point you'd share with a customer, from pitch decks to business reviews to monthly check-ins to renewal and ROI narratives, which will be mainly our focus today. We've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of content that our customers share with their customers, and we've seen what works really well and where there's maybe opportunity for improvement. And we'd love to share some of those learnings with you today. I'll pass it off to Sheldon to introduce himself now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Spencer. So my name is Sheldon Spring. I am part of the technical account management team at Matic. And as Spencer alluded to, kind of in my day-to-day role, I'm working with the customers that we have to understand their use cases and not only kind of help craft the ROI or value argument for our product and our tool, but also in many cases, learning about the ways that some of our customers go through that very same process. So our hope today is that we're able to impart some knowledge and some helpful information about how to go about this process, whether you're, on more of a customer success facing role or you're part of an internal team. I think this type of information is definitely applicable to many, many different job roles and organizations within a larger enterprise. So with that, did want to go over a high-level agenda about what we're covering today. The snazzy slogan of going from nice to have to a have to have. We've kind of taken that and segmented it out into three sort of ROI related steps. So the first being grounding your ROI and what the customer really cares about. And in this point, understanding, what is it that the customers that you're working with are hoping to do or perform with your product or service, and really sort of making that the core aspect of your ROI or your value statement. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how to develop an ROI calculation and sourcing the appropriate data, both maybe from your own data sources, but even from those of your customers to fuel that calculation. And then lastly, we're going to talk through how to communicate ROI in a way that really sort of aligns with the customers and the teams that you're working with on a day-to-day.
So why are we talking about this today? I'm sure many people on this call have heard throughout their careers the importance of demonstrating value for your customers. But in times of economic uncertainty, there's even more emphasis put on the importance on that. And a lot of the old ways of doing things just aren't enough. The previous benchmarks or the indicators of growth and success with your customers might not be adequate in times of economic uncertainty. And so if we look at the next slide, what our focus is in today is on data-driven content. Data-driven content is really the nuts and bolts of building your ROI narrative. It grounds the customer, as we'll demonstrate today, in credible evidence of the value that you're providing. And the ability to deliver that at scale is going to help you build trust with your customer, which will be a critical part of building a credible value narrative that you can lead with in critical conversations with your customers. So let's talk about how Matik views the hierarchy of data and really the value of customer data. Kind of the first level is all the meta information we have on the account. Why did they buy the product or service? Who are the primary people that are using it? What are the potential expansion opportunities? This is just the basic meta information that you probably have a lot of in your CRM and other tools. The next stage above that is usage and adoption data. So you've got the foundational information about the account, but now how are they engaging with your product or service? Like, what information do they care about, and how is that being translated into key insights at critical moments? The last piece is the most important piece, and it ties everything together. You have their business drivers, you have their usage and adoption data. Now, what does that mean in terms of ROI? ROI just isn't a dollar value. ROI is how are you helping them achieve their business goals and measuring those goals into desirable business outcomes.
And we've seen models or strategies kind of taking that hierarchy of data that Spencer was just talking about and applying it to ROI and value conversations really pay off. So two customers that we at Matik actually work with directly are Handshake and SalesLoft. And in their respective instances, Handshake works to deliver, quarterly business reviews and renewal decks to the teams that they work with. And because of that effort and because of the way that they're crafting those conversations, 50% plus of closed won revenue is influenced by these meetings and these decks that they're generating. Alternatively, SalesLoft, 98% of customers who received a QBR renewed. So really just pointing to the efficiency or the efficacy of having these kinds of resources and sending them out to customers. And actually 86% of those customers, same customers, upgraded in some way, shape, or form with SalesLoft. So really just wanted to sort of provide some background in terms of how actual companies are taking on these sorts of actions and the payoff that's come from these very same, ROI sort of conversations that we've been talking about up until this point. So right now you may be wondering, okay, what is the secret sauce? How do we go to figuring out what ROI really looks like for our company or our product? And what we've done is tried to dilute it down into a simple equation. So we have assumptions plus customer data equals ROI for value goals. And underlying all of that is this really, really core component of trust that needs to be established between you and the customer that you're hoping to engage in this ROI conversation with. So because trust is such a pivotal part of the process, it really contributes to this idea of personalization being key. So anytime that you can deliver a value-oriented conversation or an ROI conversation and really kind of tailor it once again to the needs and the goals of the customer that you're working with, that pays off exponentially in terms of having that information not only be heard but also taken back and really considered, when it comes to realizing the value of the product or service that you're offering. So starting first with trust, because it is so fundamental to this equation, we wanted to segment trust out into 3 respective areas as well. The first being data-driven. So in thinking about this option or this segment, really having multiple points throughout your time with a customer that you're working with, where you are delivering data to them and really kind of having the opportunity to build up a level of competency by sharing, hey, this is, the data that we've seen across your user base for our product, and kind of making sure that they are very much in line with what's going on with maybe adoption or usage. The next is consultative. So not only just being sort of, a trusted partner with the teams that you're working with, but also taking the next step and really providing recommendations and being kind of an advisor in a lot of ways to the teams that you're working with to once again bolster that trust. And then the last one, but definitely a very important piece, is being compassionate and really showing that you care about the initiatives or the goals that the customer team that you're working with is trying to accomplish with your product or service. So really, taking all of these segments and combining them together serves as a very, very comprehensive formula for establishing trust. So beginning first with data-driven, an example that we actually use at Matik is basically this idea of a customer journey. So when we're onboarding one of our customers to our platform, we take them through each of the steps listed here. And at each of these steps, it's very, very important for us to showcase data that basically provides some insight into how this process is going for a respective customer. So double-clicking into something like adoption, for example, when we're able to actually launch, something tangible with Matik as a tool, be this a QBR or a account review template. One of the things that we couple that meeting with, or those sets of meetings with, are usage data. What does usage look like from a user level, an account level? What's kind of feature adoption across Matik as a tool amongst your end users? And I think it's really important to note here that even if maybe usage statistics aren't quite where we would like them to be at this point in the process, it's very, very vital to still share that information, because it's, one, showcasing a level of trust that we're really being transparent, that maybe we have missed a core piece of the onboarding stage, and so usage isn't as strong as we would expect it to be. Or maybe we've done everything that we've needed to, but this usage data really serves as a sign that we need to take something else into consideration as we continue to onboard new users and onboard, new pieces of collateral. So all that to say, having this process or having some sort of process in place, we're able to share information at each sort of key point within your customer's lifecycle is going to be very, very beneficial in establishing trust. So moving on into consultative. As I said, this section here primarily focuses on not only being a partner for your customers, but or maybe other teams that you work with, at your company, but, serving as an advisor as well. And this slide here is an example of how we do that at Matic. We talk about best practices and we go through recommendations for what we have seen work really, really well in maybe previous deployments or previous implementations of our product. And in doing this, we're really establishing sort of upfront that, hey, not only are we going to help you work through issues and work through implementation, but if you ever have questions about, maybe what could be done better or what needs to be revised and maybe even optimized, these are also things that we as your partner can help with and support you in achieving. So once again, just having a way to bake in sort of bits and pieces of hey, we're going about this maybe in this manner right now, but we've actually seen other customers be very, very successful with a similar use case by adopting this format or this methodology is a great way to establish consultative trust. And then last, but definitely not least, is compassionate or compassion being shown when trying to establish trust. And I think what I've noticed is that oftentimes in comparison to data-driven or consultative trust, compassionate trust tends to get overlooked. I think, in a day-to-day situation, it can be very much heads down. Everyone is trying to work towards, the common goal of maybe getting a resource out into the field or getting, the product initially launched. That compassion sort of falls by the wayside, but it is super, super important. And I would argue maybe the most important when it comes to establishing more long-term trust with customers. So what does this look like? I think at its core, compassion really boils down to listening. So often in the effort to share out information and communicate out, business objectives, there's a lot of talking that takes place. And I'll be the first to admit, I can be someone who talks a lot to the customer partners that I work with to try and once again, sort of get them to a certain point in the customer journey. But I have to remind myself oftentimes that it's very powerful to sit back and ask questions and listen to the feedback that can be sourced from the people that I work directly with, but even more so maybe the employees and the coworkers that they serve. So this is an example of how we go about it in terms of establishing really an effective feedback loop. We want to make sure that not only are we imparting the information that we need to on the technical account management side, but we're also making space and dedicating time to source feedback from the partners that we partner with. More specifically, we actually have a dedicated session as part of our customer onboarding journey known as our end user feedback session, where we will work with our admins and our partners on the customer end to try and identify a group of either power users or maybe people that are a little bit more tentative to adopt our tool. And we bring them into a session and we basically ask them questions to try and discern, okay, what are things that maybe we're doing well? And conversely, what are things that maybe we could be doing better to try and grow usage and grow adoption across the user base. So this is just one example, but I think it can be more formal as it's laid out here, or even a little bit more informal where you really sort of take the time during meetings or checkpoints with customers to have feedback solicited during those calls as well.
Great. So now that we've established the importance of trust as you're building your ROI story really throughout the process, let's talk about what this ultimately leads to, which is demonstrating value through their value goals. And then we'll look at the individual components of building that narrative with assumptions and customer data. So let's look at how to build value goals. It should really be based on a value map that you build with your customers. So the 4 components of a really good value map is 1, starting with their business goals. To Sheldon's point, to be a compassionate customer success manager, account manager, or consultant with your customers, you need to understand their business goals. And the best way to understand their business goals is to have conversations with them to see what they're trying to achieve in their overall business. And then if they were to achieve those goals, what are the means, the business objectives in order to meet those goals? So those are based on customer conversations. If they did meet those goals, what success look like? So what are the success metrics that are actually going to be able to measure how well they're doing in order to hit those achievements? And lastly, how does this tie back to you? So what are the analytic capabilities that your tool or service is providing to help them hit those success metrics? This value map will tie your business and your capabilities directly back to their business and what they desire in success. So let's take a look at the next slide of what an example of this is for. I'm sure many people on this call have used Salesforce or know what Salesforce is. Here's an example of Salesforce's value map, where they are looking at business goals of a customer, what their objectives are, what their capabilities are as a platform to help them achieve that, and then what success looks like when that is enacted in the most optimized way possible. So all value goals should be personalized. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about the constant tug of war between scale and personalization, but as much as you can personalize these value goals in order for the customer to feel like you are listening and hearing what they want to achieve and not just telling them the narrative that is preset. All value goals should really be a collaboration with the champion, the program manager at the organization you are working with.
Yeah. On that note, Spencer's really walked through sort of what ROI can look like, the means of reaching, kind of an ROI metric or set of metrics to communicate. But the two inputs that we have listed to get to that point and kind of source the necessary ingredients, I guess I'll say, for ROI are assumptions and customer data. And so starting with assumptions, I think there are always going to be assumptions that you will have in trying to begin crafting out this ROI or this value narrative. And so I think what's important to note, right, is that any assumption that you're bringing to the table should be one that, is sort of driven or founded by your own experiences, right? Maybe working with a customer, working with other customers. So having that information ready is going to be super, super important for when you meet with, a customer champion or a customer advocate to begin laying out these assumptions and begin sort of building out this value or ROI argument. And I think another really, really key aspect here is that this should be a partnership with you and your customer champion, right, or your admin. Any sort of objections that customer admin / champion / advocate has about the assumptions that you're bringing to the table, don't view those as kind of an adversarial exchange. I think if anything, these should serve as a means of more definitively aligning on what the assumption should look like. So for example, right, let's say I'm going into a conversation where I'm making assumptions about maybe a time savings metric that we are using to calculate, ROI for a customer. And I bring that assumption to a conversation with the admin that I work really closely with as my customer champion. And they say, well, actually, that metric, that time savings, it's not really accounting for members of X department at our company who take actually a little bit more time to take on an action that my product is helping with. And so I say, okay, awesome. So we use that information to better fall on a number or fall on a metric that makes sense. And ultimately, that entire exchange is an active collaboration where, I have the trust, I have the relationship with the customer champion to undergo this type of conversation, this kind of back and forth, and really make the ROI argument a lot more comprehensive and a lot more, sort of grounded in feedback directly from the team that I'm going to end up communicating it to at large. Additionally, no ROI would be complete, or no ROI conversation would be complete without some customer data. We need some data in order to ground the ROI metrics or the ROI statistics that we're communicating. And so data can come from one of two places. It can either come internally, so the data that you and your company house. This could be quantitative in nature, like individual user results, adoption metrics or numbers. And it can also be qualitative. So I talked earlier about how at Matik, we hold those end user feedback sessions as a definitive session within our customer onboarding. And so the responses and the quotes that we receive from those end user feedback sessions are used as qualitative data when we go and communicate ROI during business reviews with our customers. So all of that is housed in the your data classification. And then for their data, it's very, very imperative that in any scenario where we're able to also tap into the data that your customers or our customers are working with or have access to, that is super beneficial to bolstering our ROI conversation. So some examples of this are business outcomes that the company may have, right? Things that we can directly tie the value or the impact of our product to when we're going into ROI conversations. Benchmarking can also be really, really helpful. And this can be two-pronged. It can be benchmarking maybe from the company-wide level, so maybe how they're performing against some of their peers in the same industry. Or what we've also seen and is really, really cool is maybe they have sort of benchmarking data for their own users, right? So maybe there are certain users that have adopted the tool or the product or service that your company offers, and they are actually performing very, very well against their peers. So you can point to that and directly say, hey, our product is really driving the success of individual contributors at your instance or in your enterprise, right? And then lastly, our time series events. So maybe there are certain goals or certain time-based accomplishments that the company is trying to reach, and your product or service actually help them achieve that maybe within the time frame or even ahead of schedule, which is obviously a very, very valuable data point. One thing that I'll note here is that your data is all information that you have maybe in Salesforce, other data sources that you may leverage. But in order to gain access to your customers' data, that really, once again, boils down to trust. Do they have trust in you as a partner to really take this information and leverage it in a way that is mutually beneficial, right? I think in a lot of instances, it's important to communicate the value of your product, but in the same vein, it can be very, very important to showcase the data and showcase the value of the partnership. I think especially at Matik, some of the strongest customer partners that we have, I shouldn't say entirely, it is greatly due to the work that our customer partners are doing as well. So, basically, the trust needs to exist in order for them to share their data, but the trust also to take that data and make it a compelling narrative for everyone, all of the stakeholders in the conversation is really, really important as well.
Great. Now let's talk about communicating ROI. This is often the part that is most difficult for a lot of customers, and this is a part where, if not done well, can seem intimidating. So let's go into like the three main components of delivering a compelling ROI story. The first is proper visualizations. People often will put too much content on one slide, and they will overwhelm from the main point. You do not need to prove out every aspect of your ROI narrative. You can have those. You can have, I've seen some pretty robust ROI calculators in my day. You do not need to have those though on a slide. You should have your main points in there and then have the ability to dive deeper if those questions were to arise that they need a little bit more context and a little bit more explanation. But you should really stick to again, the principles, the outcomes that the customer cares about, and then speak to those. It should be more based on the talk track and a conversation than going through every component of an ROI calculation. And this goes along the second piece, which is defending. So oftentimes when people are trying to defend their ROI, they feel like they're on their back heels. That I'm talking about ROI now. I'm not fully comfortable maybe doing this, and I'm not sure if I'm able to handle objections. Ideally, before you ever get into an ROI conversation with an economic buyer, you have a program manager champion, you have an end user champion, and you could go into those conversations with a mix of their assumptions, mix of the data that you have on your business, and build this story in collaboration with them that is really completely defendable, and you won't even feel like you're defending it. You'll feel like it's a continuation of a conversation that is totally addressed with the customer. The last piece is reinforcing. Reinforcing is really key here. So when we talk about reinforcement, we're talking about how are the components which build up to that value story being reinforced with end user stories, data, the trust that you built throughout them. On this slide, for example, whenever we're having a conversation about value, before we show the value slide and the business outcome slide, we're showing testimonials from customers, because once they see those faces, those people they trust in their organization, and the success they're seeing with your platform or service, it immediately makes that conversation a lot easier, because you have real evidence directly from them of how valuable you've been for them. And the last piece that we'll talk about is what I mentioned earlier. There's a constant tug of war between scale and personalization. How much, especially for enablement, if you are trying to scale the ROI narrative, but you're also trying to personalize it, can often seem like those are at opposite ends of the spectrum. They don't necessarily have to be. It can't take up a lot of time or resources, but especially with what we've seen our customers do, where they are personalizing data-driven content at scale, and they're tailoring it to the exact audiences. That's exactly what we are doing here at Matik, and it's something that we ourselves use at Matik. Is what are the ways that we can scale this content, but also what are the ways we can personalize it, and that really is key. Finding that balance will lead to really successful outcomes for your business.
Totally. And to close out the presentation today, I think in order to assist the members or the people who are attending the call today in the ROI creation process, or the value statement creation process, we at Matik want to offer up this template library that we have available free of charge to anyone on the call that would love to, or anyone in the session that would like to take advantage of it. And regardless of where you stand, in that value creation process, whether it's something that you and your team are sort of initially taking on and need some pointers or need, kind of a jumping off point, or if it's something that you feel very strongly about and serves as kind of a core tenet of your department's strategy, I think these templates can serve even as inspiration in that regard, to see, maybe what other ways to visualize information or other ways to communicate value and impact. So yeah, I wanted to give this as a sort of closing note. And once again, I wanted to thank everybody for joining this session today and listening to Spencer and I discuss sort of our strategies at Matik and how we go about these conversations. So with that, wanted to open up the floor to questions if there are any.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi guys, my name is Gina. I'm the Partner Success Manager here at Rev Genius. I'm the one that's been monitoring the chats here on AirMeet and our LinkedIn partners. So we do have a couple of questions from the audience, guys. I'm going to go in order. Our first question is from Rick, who joined us via LinkedIn. He has a question for the group. He said, how do you go about ROI when certain data points are hard to measure or might be out of the account rep's control? I imagine it is getting buy-in to share those key data points. For example, Salesforce data to better understand intent data's impact on pipeline or one.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one, and feel free to add any more context, Sheldon. This really goes back to that equation we shared around a mix of assumptions and customer or client data to build that ROI story. A lot of times, and I've seen this work particularly well, I mean, whole organizations have value consultant teams where they're building ROI narratives just with assumptions alone. Data is fantastic to have because it's credible evidence of your story, but you can build assumptions into your narrative and get buy-in from your customers based on those assumptions. Let's say you're talking about the conversion rate on calls and what that leads to in terms of pipeline. If you're a outbound tool, you could build those conversion assumptions. Maybe it's not the 10% conversions that you go in with, but you're building it. Maybe it's 5%. Build it with them as a way to show that you're speaking to value. It's not so much having them believe exactly that ROI you're showing them. It's about having that value conversation that you are bringing value to their organization. The conversation is more important than defending the final outcome of it. Sheldon, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, not too much more. I would say, yeah, it can be a tricky process, definitely, to kind of parse through the data and really sort of determine what can be used to maybe bolster or validate an assumption that's being made. But I think this also kind of comes down to, and Spencer talked about this definitely, but just kind of having conversations with your champions, your customer champions, and really understanding like, hey, maybe there's this data point that we have on our side that we're thinking of leveraging to formulate an assumption, or maybe they shared a piece of data, and confirming whether or not that data kind of ties into the narrative and ties into the value statement that they're trying to drive on their end, right? Maybe they have a certain goal where that metric, even though it's maybe not quite as solid as other pieces of data, would be really, really profound to include from a narrative perspective. So yeah, I think in those instances, it really does kind of come down to speaking with the customer contact and determining if it's the right move to move forward with a data point, or if it would be better to leverage maybe something else that's a bit easier to defend in the value conversation that you have with stakeholders.
To give, and not to get too sidetracked, to give one tangible example is, we work with customers and they use our assets and different key points of the customer lifecycle. And so we know when they're using them, what accounts they're using them for, but that's only half the equation. We also want to know, okay, what happens when we do touch those accounts? What sort of outcomes are we seeing? But by identifying a program manager champion on their end, we're able to pair their data with our data. And then suddenly we're able to see the actual business outcomes from using certain assets from our platform.
All right,
Gina,
guys.
did we have another question in there?
Yeah, actually we do. This one came from Olga. She had commented, super valuable. I like how you choose to talk about trust. Indeed, highly underestimated. As you talked about personalization a lot, I wonder how you think about communicating ROI from a more scaled lens, thinking in terms of one to many formulas?
Yeah, so I will say we do have the benefit here at Matic to be able to generate, scaled content. Where we've got a lot of customers that use Matic to develop ROI calculators, and they've got a lot of different flavors of ROI calculator because, again, one size doesn't fit all a lot of the times. And what we're able to do there is have a mix of conditions where you're able to look at, well, who's the function of this, or what's the function that I'm speaking to? What's the persona of the person I'm speaking to? What industries are they in? And making sure that when you're building that content, it's scaled, but it's also personalized because you're building that in. So, Matic aside, you really want to build multiple flavors of your ROI narrative. You want to make sure that people have those resources that is tailored to them. So it's usually not, a one size fits all calculation. It should be tied back again to that value map. And if your organization has that and builds that out properly, that value map will be your holy grail. It'll cover most business objectives that you potentially see, and it'll talk about how the capabilities that you sell with your tool or service are being tied to those business objectives and what those success metrics could potentially be if they were to achieve those capabilities.
Yeah, I'll just note too that this question, I think, is directly related to the second to last slide with that struggle or that balance between personalization and scale. And so I think that, yeah, to Spencer's point, having different kind of flavors of ROI calculations or ROI decks is definitely a way to try and address that need for balance. And then, yeah, I think too, after creating maybe an initial ROI calculation for a particular segment or for a particular industry that your company oftentimes works with, then the personalization piece can really be driven a little bit more by having conversations or leveraging some of that compassion or consultative sort of trust that's been established, and taking the data that you've gathered from prior interactions with the customer team and peppering that into the calculation. Maybe it doesn't have to be the calculation directly. It could even just be like the deck that you're going through. But having both, I think, is a really effective way to not only scale from an industry or segment perspective, but also kind of maintain that personalization piece.
Right.
I think that really covered. I really like that personalization and how it kind of correlates. So, audience, is there any other questions that we have out there? If so, please post either in the comments if you're joining us via LinkedIn or on the chat. We'll give it a couple of seconds, see if anybody else pops through, but definitely want to thank Sheldon and Spencer for taking time out of their afternoon to go over, how to survive the cut. So we're super excited to have you guys here. Thank you so much for joining us. Audience, make sure you guys go out on LinkedIn, find these guys. If you guys think of questions afterward, hit them up, message them, message us, message me. We're all on there. We'll be more than happy to direct you either to the information that you need or answer your question directly. So with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude our afternoon webinar. Thank you guys so much for joining us again, Spencer, Sheldon, and all of our audience members for taking time out of their busy days to join us. Make sure you like and follow all of us on LinkedIn, and hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.